I sat by the incubator, watching the tiny rise and fall of my baby's chest. He was so small, just a little over 600 grams when he was born at 24 weeks and 3 days. They called him a micro-preemie. I called him my miracle. His name is Kwame, and from the moment I saw him, I knew I would never leave his side. The hospital became my home. I slept in a chair in the NICU, barely moving except to stretch or grab a quick bite. I memorized every sound the machines made. I knew which beat meant good news and which meant I had to call a nurse. I watched the monitors so closely that even the nurses began to trust me when I said something wasn't right. My husband, Kwabena, tried his best to be strong for both of us. He's a teacher, and after I had an emergency C-section, our savings nearly disappeared. But he didn't stop. He picked up more classes, stayed out late tutoring kids, and worked Saturdays. We didn't have much, but we had hope. Every night, he came to the hospital, kissed my forehead, and held my hand. He would look at Kwame and say, "He's a fighter," just like his mother. The lead doctor, Dr. Mensah, gave me the truth every day. No sugarcoating. Kwame's lungs were weak, and he needed help to breathe. But his heart was strong, and that gave us hope. Dr. Mensah told me, "He's small, but he's not giving up." And neither was I. I talked to Kwame all the time. I told him about the world outside the hospital. I promised him beach days, birthday parties, and bedtime stories. I told him about the mango trees in our neighborhood and how we would one day climb them together. I sang songs to him, even when my voice cracked from crying. The nurses often smiled and said, "He hears you." That's why he's still here. Some nights were hard. The machines would beep in panic, and I would hold my breath, praying he would pull through. And he did. Again and again, he fought back. I saw the strength of a lion in his tiny body. They said science was keeping him alive, but I knew love played a part too. My love for him gave me strength I didn't know I had. I didn't care about the time, the pain, or the fear. I only cared about that little boy in the incubator. I leaned forward, placed my finger gently inside, and whispered, "We're going to make it, Kwame. You and me." It had been nearly 2 months since I first stepped into the NICU, and every day since then had been a test of strength. I had stopped counting the days. I lived from hour to hour, watching over my son. No one from my family had come to see us. Not once. I didn't ask for much, just their presence, even for a moment. But the silence from Kumasi was loud. Then one morning, out of nowhere, I got a call. My parents were on their way. I should have felt relief, maybe joy, but instead I felt nervous. Something about the suddenness made my stomach turn. I tried to tell myself they were coming out of love, that they just didn't know how to show it before. I tried to believe it. When they finally arrived, I saw them before they saw me. My father wore a shining gold agbada that looked like it was meant for a wedding, not a hospital. My mother had on high heels and held a small designer handbag in the crook of her arm. And then there was Kojo, my younger brother. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, slim trousers, and dark sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. He looked like he was headed to a party. They walked into the hospital with the kind of energy that said, "We won't be staying long." I stood up to greet them. My back ached, and my eyes were tired, but I tried to smile. My mother barely looked at me before glancing around with a face full of discomfort. "It smells like chemicals in here," she said. My father asked where the nearest restroom was, already distracted. Kojo didn't even say hello. He just tapped his phone over and over again, muttering, "I need to charge this before my Zoom call." I led them to the hand-washing station outside the NICU. "You have to scrub in," I explained gently. "They're very strict about hygiene." My mother wrinkled her nose. "Even us? We're just visiting." "Yes," I said. "Even visitors." Kojo groaned. "This is too much. I'm wearing clean clothes." "That's enough, isn't it?" I swallowed the words rising in my throat. I had no energy to argue. I just needed them to follow the rules so they could see their grandson. That was all I wanted, for them to look at him and understand what I was going through. Inside, I showed them Kwame. He was sleeping peacefully, a tiny bundle of hope and wires. My father stood a little too far away, as if scared to get close. My mother stared but didn't say much. Kojo peeked in, then turned back to his phone. He whispered, "What time is it?" "My internship interview is in an hour. Do you think I can use the hospital Wi-Fi?" I said nothing. My heart felt hollow. I had imagined this moment so many times. My parents coming in, tears in their eyes, reaching out to hold my hand. I thought they would ask questions, want updates, maybe even tell me they were proud. But none of that happened. All they talked about was Kojo's future. His law school, his interview, his dreams. My mother said, "He's worked so hard for this. We're praying he gets it." My father nodded, telling him, "Focus on that, not this place. Not this place." As if this place wasn't where my life was happening. As if my son's fight for survival was just a small distraction in their bigger picture. They left less than an hour later. No hugs, no blessings, just a polite goodbye and a promise to check in again soon. I watched them walk away, their expensive clothes rustling, their heels clicking on the tile. And I knew in that moment, I was in this alone. I had always thought the worst moment of my life was the day I went into labor too early. But that day in the NICU, I learned that pain can stretch even further. It's not just about what happens to you, it's about who does it and how little they care afterward. After the chaos, when the alarms finally stopped and the nurses had stabilized my baby again, there was this cold, sharp silence in the room. The kind of silence that doesn't come with peace. I stood frozen, staring at the small incubator where my son lay. His chest was rising slowly, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding like a drum in my ear. They were still there, my parents and Kojo, standing just a few feet away. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I thought maybe they would apologize. Maybe they would panic like I had. Maybe they would realize what they had just done. But no one said sorry. My mother was fixing her scarf, complaining about the air conditioning. My father had his hands behind his back like he was inspecting some business project. And Kojo looked annoyed, as if someone had disrupted his day, not his nephew's fragile life. I remember my father looking at the nurses and saying, "It was just a plug." I remember Kojo saying, "But the phone didn't even charge." My mother, always quick to protect her favorite son, said, "Honestly, how was he supposed to know? They should have covered those sockets if they were that important." Covered the sockets. Not "we're sorry." Not "how is the baby?" Not one look at me, not one. And the worst part, they all started looking at me, as if I was overreacting, as if my tears were too loud for the situation. My father said my emotions were clouding my judgment. My mother pulled me aside and whispered, "You need to calm down before you embarrass yourself." I felt something inside me break. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. Angry that the same people who were supposed to protect me were acting like guests in a hotel, annoyed by rules and discomfort. Angry that they treated my son like background noise in their bigger story. Angry that their pride mattered more than his breath. The nurses tried to explain the gravity of what happened. Matron ESI was shaking with rage, telling them this could have cost my baby his life. But even with that, even with professionals spelling it out, they refused to carry any guilt. And me? I stood there, still shaking, still trying to breathe, realizing something I didn't want to admit. My family had crossed a line. Not because of a mistake, mistakes happen, but because they didn't care that it nearly ended everything I loved. That day I stopped expecting love from them. I stopped hoping they would change. I stopped thinking we were on the same side. Because if someone can almost kill your child and still think you're the problem, you don't need to wait for them to say it out loud. They already have. They left soon after, muttering something about being late. I didn't walk them out. I sat down beside the incubator, held my son's tiny hand through the glove box, and whispered, "It's just us now, my love. But that's enough." I didn't speak for hours after they were escorted out. The security team came in quietly, but with firm authority, and within minutes, my family. No, the people I used to call my family were gone from the unit. But they didn't go out crying. They didn't look shaken or even remotely sorry. They left arguing with the nurses, arguing with the guard, arguing with each other. And then there was just me. Me and the beeping monitors. Me and the sound of machines trying to keep my baby alive. I sat beside his incubator, hands pressed to the side of the glass, watching every flicker on the screen like it was a heartbeat in my own chest. I knew those numbers too well by now. I could tell when they dipped even a little. And that night, they dipped more than once. Every time the oxygen line flickered or the bradycardia monitor buzzed, my body tensed like I was being shocked. I held my breath with him. I prayed with no words. And when the nurses came in to stabilize him again and again, I felt smaller and smaller. Not helpless, but something worse. Like I had let people too close who should have never been trusted with something so fragile. Dr. Mensah came back around midnight. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to explain what I already knew. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "We'll watch him together." That moment meant more to me than anything my parents ever said in my life. My husband arrived just after 2 in the morning. He walked in with his backpack still slung over his shoulder, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. I had called him hours ago, barely able to speak, and he had come straight from his shift without even stopping at home. He sat beside me without asking what happened. He saw it in my face. We took turns watching Kwame. One of us would close our eyes for 10 minutes while the other stared at the monitor. Even when the nurses promised they were watching too, we couldn't stop. That night stretched on like it would never end. No one from my family called, not to check on the baby, not to ask if he was okay, not even to defend themselves. And maybe that silence hurt more than all the shouting from earlier, because silence, in moments like that, says everything. I wanted to believe it was ignorance, that they didn't understand what they had done, that it was all just a horrible mistake. But as the hours passed and no one reached out, I started to understand the truth. They didn't think they did anything wrong. They thought I overreacted. They thought their visit was more important than the life they nearly ended. And so I sat there in the low hum of machines, next to a baby fighting for every breath, and I began to accept something I never wanted to face. That some people can share your blood, but not your heart. They almost killed my son, and they didn't even notice. That realization didn't just break me. It cleared the fog. It made everything sharp. And from that moment, I knew I wasn't waiting on apologies anymore. I was done explaining, done hoping. It was just us now, me, my husband, and our tiny warrior. That was all the family we needed. The morning after that long, sleepless night, I sat beside Kwame in silence, my hand gently resting on the edge of his incubator. The hum of machines continued around me, steady and sharp. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting settings, but I barely noticed them. My mind was elsewhere, stuck on what had happened and the fact that no one from my family had reached out, not even once. Then matronly SI came in. She wasn't smiling, but there was a calm firmness in her eyes. She knelt beside me and said softly, "You don't have to carry this alone." I looked at her, unsure what she meant. She sat down and told me that every corner of the NICU was monitored. Cameras were everywhere, for safety, for documentation, and in moments like this, for truth. At first, I didn't know how to feel. Shocked, maybe. Then relief slowly washed over me. I hadn't imagined what happened. I didn't exaggerate anything. Somewhere on a screen was the exact moment they unplugged my baby's oxygen for something as stupid as a phone. I wasn't crazy, and now I had proof. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside the unit to get a moment of fresh air. That's when I called Ya. We'd grown up like siblings, and he'd always been the one person I trusted outside my husband. When he picked up, he could hear the tiredness in my voice before I even said a word. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. Every detail. And when I was done, he didn't hesitate. "They can't get away with that," he said. "Not because they're your family, but because a child's life was put at risk." He said he knew a legal team in Accra that handled complex hospital-related cases. People who knew how to fight this kind of negligence. Not with anger, but with clarity and law. When I told my husband that evening, he nodded. "We don't need to shout. We'll just show the truth." And that was it. We weren't seeking revenge. We didn't want to destroy anyone, but we couldn't let it slide. Not when our child had almost died. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt something return to my chest. Something like control. Not over everything, not over my son's fragile condition, but over my own voice. The feeling that I wasn't powerless anymore. I went back into the NICU, took my seat beside Kwame, and whispered, "We're going to protect you, baby, no matter what it takes." The world didn't stop for us. The machines kept beeping, but inside something shifted. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about making sure no other parent had to sit in a hospital room wondering if their child's life mattered less than someone's phone battery. And I was ready. When I left the hospital that morning, the sun was already rising, casting a soft golden hue across the city. My feet felt heavy as I walked, not from lack of sleep, but from everything I now carried. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't change the past, but I could make sure the truth was seen, heard, and remembered. The first place I went wasn't to a lawyer or even back home. I went to a quiet cafe I used to visit when I was pregnant, before the hospital visits, before the wires and beeping machines became my world. I sat in the corner, pulled out my notebook, and started writing. Not a legal plan, not a formal statement, just everything I felt. Every memory, every word they had said when the alarms went off. How Kojo laughed. how my father waved his hand like it was nothing. I wrote until my fingers hurt, until the paper was soaked in tears. And when I finished, I took a deep breath and tore the pages out, one by one. Later, back at the hospital, I handed the pages to my friend Yaw. "Don't share it," I said. "Just read it. I need someone to know how this felt." He read it without saying a word, and when he looked up, his eyes were red. He didn't try to comfort me or say it would be okay. He just nodded, like he understood something deeper than pain. He understood purpose. In the days that followed, I began to notice how quiet my phone was. No messages from my parents. No apologies. No attempt to explain or even pretend. They had simply vanished, like what happened was too inconvenient for their perfect image. I checked social media. Nothing. They hadn't said a word. But people talk. And soon I began hearing stories. A nurse whispered that Mr. Addo had stormed into his workplace the day after the incident, yelling about being mistreated at the hospital. Another friend told me Kojo had posted a cryptic tweet about fake family drama and jealous sibling. It stung, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because truth doesn't argue. It reveals. Meanwhile, the hospital itself had become more alert, more careful. There were new notices on the NICU walls, signs reminding people that every second matters, that lives depend on machines most people don't even understand. Nurses began giving extra warnings during visits. Matron ESI told me one evening, "It's painful, but your story is changing things already." I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, but also clear, like I was finally standing on solid ground. At home, my husband created a folder on his laptop titled "For Kwame." In it, he saved everything: videos, messages, witness notes, and a copy of my handwritten pages. "One day," he said, "he'll know the whole story, and he'll know his life mattered." I stood at the window that night, staring out at the city lights. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't afraid anymore. They had unplugged my son's life, but I had found a way to plug in the truth, and I wasn't done yet. When I walked into the NICU one morning, one of the younger nurses handed me her phone with a shy smile. "You need to see this," she said. On the screen was a video, edited and captioned, showing part of the NICU incident from the security footage. It had been shared on a parenting page with thousands of followers. The caption read, "This baby almost died because someone wanted to charge a phone." I didn't know whether to cry or feel relieved. At least now people were listening. By the end of the day, I saw the video again on a legal advocacy page, then a medical ethics forum, and then on TikTok with dramatic music. In each version, the story grew clearer and stronger. Strangers from all over the world commented, expressing outrage, sympathy, and support. Some said they worked in hospitals and had seen similar neglect. Others said they were lawyers who planned to show this video in ethics classes. A few shared their own NICU journeys, stories of fragile little babies and the machines that kept them alive. I never posted the footage myself, but I didn't stop it from spreading either. The truth was out now, and it had wings. At the hospital, things began to change. A few staff members who had previously kept their distance now gave me quiet nods of respect. Dr. Mensah told me gently, "Amma, you've started something much bigger than you know." Even hospital management, usually so formal, began reviewing policies. They called it a system review, but I knew what it really was. They didn't want to be the next viral scandal. Some nights, I'd lie in bed next to Kwabena, unable to sleep. I'd scroll through comments and private messages from strangers. Some were kind. Some shared legal resources. A few were harsh, telling me I should forgive my family. But most people, they just understood. And that was enough to keep me going. Meanwhile, something strange happened in my own circle. Distant relatives began reaching out. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years sent voice notes pretending to check on Kwame. One aunt even asked if I had exaggerated the story for attention. I didn't reply. I had learned that silence can be more powerful than explanation. One evening, I was at the hospital canteen when I overheard two interns talking. "Did you hear about that guy Kojo Addo?" One whispered. "The one who unplugged a baby's monitor? He tried applying to my cousin's law firm. They've blocked his email." They didn't know I was nearby, and I didn't say anything. I just sipped my tea and stared at the sugar packet in my hand, heart pounding. Not with fear or anger this time, but with something close to peace. I wasn't celebrating anyone's downfall. That was never the goal. But I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. Actions have consequences. And for once, those consequences weren't falling on the quiet mother or the tiny baby. They were falling where they belonged. The story kept spreading. It reached local news, then international pages. A journalist even requested an interview, but I declined. I didn't want fame. I wanted change. And little by little, I could feel it happening. All this started because someone unplugged something they didn't understand. But what they didn't expect was that their careless moment would wake up a world that had been silent for too long. I held my son against my chest for the first time that morning. His tiny body rested on mine like a folded leaf, trembling with the effort of breathing. Wires still ran from his chest and legs, but the nurses had arranged everything so I could cradle him close. I remember the warm silence, the steady rhythmic beep of the machines, his skin on mine soft as fog. For the first time in months, my arms didn't feel empty. That moment didn't fix everything, but it healed something inside me. It had taken so long to reach this point. Every gram of weight Kwame gained was a victory. Every stable reading, every day without alarms, felt like a prayer answered. The nurses called him the warrior now. He fights like he knows someone's cheering, Matron ESI once whispered to me. I was. Every single day. Life outside the hospital kept changing, but in here, time moved differently. We lived from one monitor reading to the next, one feeding tube adjustment to another. I stopped counting the days. I didn't even check social media anymore. My world was this room, this incubator, this baby. Kwabena took on everything else. He brought my meals, washed my clothes, talked to the doctors when I couldn't. Sometimes he sat beside me and just held my hand while I stared at our son. We didn't talk about what happened. Not much. Not anymore. It was like we both agreed that silence was safer, for now. Once, during evening rounds, Dr. Mensah asked if I had a support system. I nodded. I didn't tell him my parents hadn't reached out. I didn't mention that Kojo had vanished completely from my life. The truth was, I didn't want updates. I didn't care where they were or what they were doing. The distance was my protection. Other parents in the NICU began sharing their stories with me. One mother lost her twins at 26 weeks and still came to volunteer every weekend. Another father taught himself how to read medical charts just to feel less helpless. We became a quiet community of tired hope. No one judged. No one asked too many questions. We just nodded at each other during long nights and early mornings. One afternoon, I saw a group of medical students touring the NICU. Matron ESI led them with quiet authority. When they reached Kwame's station, she paused. This little boy survived what most wouldn't, she said. He's a reminder that negligence has consequences and love has power. None of the students knew I was his mother. I didn't speak, but I stood a little straighter in my chair, watching them take notes, their faces thoughtful. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in weeks. I wrote, "Today, he opened his eyes for longer than 5 seconds. Today, he squeezed my finger. Today, we made it another day. No court ruling, no viral post, no punishment would ever match the joy of that tiny grip around my thumb. That was the only justice I needed now. We weren't done yet, but we were winning. Quietly, hour by hour, breath by breath." Kwame came home weighing just under 4 pounds. No oxygen tubes. No monitors. Just him in a warm blanket, his small fists curled up by his cheeks like he was still fighting the world. But this time, the battle was mostly won. We walked into our home as a family, me, Kwabena, and Kwame, after what felt like a lifetime inside the NICU. We didn't throw a welcome party. There were no balloons, no banners. Just quiet joy. We kept the lights low, the rooms clean, and the noise soft. Kwame's crib was set beside our bed, and every sound he made woke me. But I didn't mind. I watched him breathe. I kissed his toes. I sang to him at dawn. It felt like starting over, but with a deeper kind of love. Every week brought something new. An ounce gained, a longer nap, the first time he laughed in his sleep. His eyes followed me across the room. He started gripping toys. Every milestone was a celebration. Quibino would hold him up high and whisper, "My boy, you did it again." That child taught us patience, faith, and the meaning of fierce, determined love. 2 years later, Kwame was running through our hallway in socks too big for him, laughing as he slipped and got up again. His lungs were strong, his voice louder than I ever imagined possible for a baby born at 24 weeks. Sometimes I'd just stare at him and remember those early nights when I didn't know if he'd survive the next hour. And now here he was asking for more pawpaw and running circles around the couch. It was during a routine checkup at the children's hospital that I met her. We were in the waiting room, and her little girl was trying to share crayons with Kwame. The woman smiled at me, friendly and tired like all mothers in hospital waiting rooms. After some small talk, she asked Kwame's age, then paused. "Wait, what's your name?" When I told her, her eyes widened. "Amakumi? You're Kwame's mom? From the Royal Unity NICU? Are you related to Kojo Ado?" The tone in her voice made my stomach tighten, but I just nodded. She shook her head slowly and gave a little laugh. "My husband's Mr. Morrison. He runs a firm in Accra. Kojo applied there, actually. This story about the NICU. It's become something of a legend in legal circles. Every new intern hears about it. Never be the charger guy, they say. That video is still used in ethics talks." She wasn't unkind, just honest. I didn't feel shame. Not anymore. I just felt distant from it all, like that chapter belonged to another life. I thanked her and turned back to Kwame, who was now trying to fit crayons into his pocket. I smiled and picked him up, holding him close. There were no regrets. Not for choosing to speak up. Not for seeking justice. Not for walking away from people who had hurt us and refused to understand why it mattered. I'd done what I needed to do. Not for revenge, but to protect the most fragile, most precious life I'd ever known. And now here he was. Whole. Home. Ours. I never replied to any of their letters. They came one after the other, long ones from my mother, short ones from Kojo, and eventually a typed apology from my father. All of them filled with guilt, blame, deflection, and just enough regret to make themselves feel better. But none of them ever said the words that would have mattered most. "We endangered your child's life, and we understand how wrong that was." So I kept silent. I had more important things to do. Kwame had just started preschool, his backpack too big for his little back, bouncing behind him as he skipped into the classroom. He clutched his favorite toy, a plastic doctor's kit with a red stethoscope and blue clipboard, and told anyone who asked that he wanted to be a doctor who saves the babies. He didn't understand what had happened to him. Not fully, but he knew he'd been born very small. He knew he had to fight, and he knew we'd fought with him. One night, while I was helping him sort his toy syringe and thermometer, he looked up and asked, "Mummy, how come I don't have a grandpa and grandma like some of the other kids?" I paused. Then I held his tiny hand and said gently, "Some people aren't safe to be around, my love, even if they're family by blood. Sometimes it's more important to be around people who love you enough to protect you." He nodded. "Like Grandma ESI?" I smiled. "Yes, like Grandma ESI." Matron ESI came to every birthday. She called him her miracle boy and spoiled him with books and jollof rice. She wasn't related to us, but she'd stood over his incubator night after night, guarding him like a lion. When I was too tired to pray, she whispered blessings over him. That made her more family than anyone I was born to. Dr. Mensah became his godmother, always answering his pretend medical questions like they were serious consultations. And the other NICU parents, we still met every few months, our kids now wild and loud, no longer fragile and silent. They had their own scars, and we shared ours like a language no one else could understand. That was our chosen family. One day, Kwame was playing in the living room, using his stethoscope to check my heartbeat. "Beep, beep, beep," he said, imitating the sound of a heart monitor, his face serious, his little fingers pressing gently on my chest. "You're healthy, Mummy," he declared. I laughed and kissed his forehead. "Real family doesn't unplug your life support," I told him. "Real family guards it with their lives." We had nothing flashy. No holiday cards from distant relatives, no weekend visits to grandparents' homes. But we had peace. We had truth. And we had each other. We didn't just survive. We grew. We healed. We thrived. And every time I looked at my son, standing strong in his little doctor's coat, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be.